So welcome everybody. I am Lauren Pibworth, and I am so excited to be able to bring you Ruth Sirman, who is fairly brilliant, and we had an amazing conversation, and I asked her to have it again so that all of you can benefit from it. So I may pop in a little bit, but this is Ruth's show, so sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Thanks, Lauren. So just for those of you who are on the call, this is an interactive discussion. If you've got any questions, you've got any comments, anything that you want to add, just unmute yourself and ask it. You won't bother me if you ask questions in the middle of it. I would actually rather that than trying to cram all the questions into the last few minutes at the end of the show. So my objective in doing this is actually to give you some tools that will help that will help when you're trying to navigate the choices that we're all facing right now as solopreneurs, as speakers, as mediators, as consultants, as whatever your business is. And even if you're not in business, even if you're working for an employer, I don't think there's a business on the planet right now that is not going through some fairly dramatic challenges around how to navigate these somewhat unprecedented times, and probably one of the toughest markets, I think, that I've ever encountered in 25 plus years of running businesses. So with that in mind, I would like to do is just start in. The chat box is open, so hopefully everybody's familiar with how to do that. You can either put chat questions in the chat box, and Lauren's going to monitor that for me, or as I said, just unmute your mic and just pose your question. So essentially, when I start to look at some of the things that I've been going through over the last while, I have to admit this is a little bit me. This would be me, and then here's all the people that depend on me for whatever they depend on me for. So whether or not they're colleagues, whether they're clients, whether they're family, it doesn't really matter. It's just that sense of overwhelming responsibility that I feel in terms of where I'm at and where I need to go, and trying to figure out the easiest way and best way to navigate all of this. And for anybody who doesn't know me well, I'm a paddler, so that tends to creep into my presentations a little bit. I'm actually in this boat. That would be me right there. Meet my son-in-law, meet my daughter, and I'm not quite sure who that guy was. So the other thing that kicks in is, for people who are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we're down here right now, the vast majority of us. And even if you're working, the fact that you have to go into work, I suspect this second layer is pretty prevalent for just about everybody, in the sense of we can't move up Maslow's hierarchy until we know that these bottom ones are under control. And for many people right now with limited income, especially if you're the business owner, you may have employees, you may have people that you feel you're letting down because you haven't got the funds to pay them. That brings into a lot of questions around things like, can I pay the mortgage? Where's the groceries coming from? And so on. With respect to safety and security, every healthcare worker, every kid working in a grocery store, every garbage truck driver, they're all scrambling to make sure that they're managing their own health and safety and the health and safety of everybody around them as well. And my parents are in long-term care, so all of what's going on in long-term care homes around here is hitting me really hard, partly because everything you're hearing on the news about the nursing home in Elmont. I lived in Elmont for 35 years. I can only imagine that some of those people, I know people who work there, and I can imagine that some of the people that we've lost are people that I've known and spent 35, 40 years living and working with. So we're all in that kind of challenge. And I was actually thinking about the thought process that's running through my head when I initially realized that every contract I had been canceled. And this was about as close to my thought process as I could get initially. Now, Lauren, I don't know if you want to kick in, but based on our conversation, I don't think I'm the only one.
You are absolutely not the only one. And I'll tell you that I spent several weeks convincing people that taking their existing product online right now was maybe not the wisest choice. I mean, it's a gut reaction of, oh, so this isn't working, I'll do this, but without necessarily thinking through whether that makes sense or not. So many people are trying. I mean, I work with professional speakers only, and they're all trying to take their stuff online, and that's not necessarily the right answer, and that's what started this whole thing. So you're absolutely right there, Ruth.
Well, and I think part of the challenge is, and this is what I wanted to talk about today, and it was actually that comment that Lauren just made right now about her clients and what she was getting that prompted me to slip into consultant mode and start talking, because I think as you said that, I went, oh, let me tell you where that's coming from. And so those are the strategies and the tools that I want to start sharing with you. So essentially, where we are right now, and the decision making that we need to be doing is going to have some fairly significant short, medium, and long-term implications in terms of the quality of the decisions that we make and the medium and long-term ramifications in particular. So if you've ever been in whitewater, you know the last place you want to be is in a direct line with somebody coming down behind you. Because if they're traveling faster than you are, and particularly if they're not really good at steering, they're going to run right over top of you. So if you're sitting there and all of a sudden you've got all these people in that boat coming down on top of you, it's not a safe place to be. It's not a wise place to be. So as we're making these decisions, we need to keep in mind where the rest of the market is and where we are relative to the people around us. And you can take that to any level that you want to, but it's just a thought process. The other thing that I learned very, very quickly is that whenever we start making decisions within a system, and our businesses are systems, our bodies are systems, our families are systems, but whenever we are dealing with a confined, well, actually it's not even confined, when we're dealing with decisions that apply to the context in which we're working, that's maybe a better way to put it. There is a significant risk if we're not paying attention that we can set off some fairly significant unintentional consequences that we may be completely unaware of in the short term, but in the medium and the long term, they have the potential to come back and haunt us in a very significant and in some cases very damaging way. And I love this cartoon because if a picture is worth 1,000 words, this one's worth 10,000 when it comes to decision making. So the other thing that I've learned as a consultant when I'm working with organizations, and mostly I deal with dysfunctional workplaces, so I help toxic workplaces change the dynamics to where they become workplaces where people actually want to come to work. And so I spend a lot of time with the senior management and executive teams because they are DJing the dance. They are the leadership team. And one of the questions I always ask them is, how many vantage points do you have? Are you aware of what's going on below the surface? Most managers are not, because there's an information ceiling that employees don't want to share the reality up the line. So an employee goes to their frontline manager and says, we have a problem with machine number 6 on the manufacturing line. I think the bearings are going. And the manager says, well, we'll see what we can do about that. I'll add it to the list. And then his boss says to him, how are things on the line today? And he says, oh, not too bad. Got a few problems with machine number 6, but it's manageable. Then the plant manager says to the floor manager, how are things today? And the response is, pretty good, the usual. Now, the plant manager never hears about machine number 6. When machine number 6 goes down, it's not unlikely that the plant manager will be going, why didn't anybody tell me? And the employee's going, well, I told the supervisor. And somewhere along the line, the messages get filtered as they go up. So if you don't have your head under the water, if you're not aware of what's going on down there, then chances are you are missing a significant portion of the operational reality within your organization. If you're standing beside, you get one vantage point. If you're in the middle of it, you may be struggling a little bit to figure out how to get out of it effectively because you can't see. On the other hand, if you're in a hot air balloon over top of the Deschênes Rapids, you get a much different picture than you do if you're right smack in the middle of it. And if you're paddling like crazy, then your focus is usually 5 or 10 feet in front of you to make sure there's no rocks there. And you don't have that long-term thing. If you're not in the picture in terms of all of this stuff going on, then you're making decisions from a distance. And this is what happens when we have head offices. They think, you know, they're doing the best they can to try and help. They're not necessarily aware that their team is facing this. So as we move forward, I want you to think for a few minutes about your particular situation, because every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it's getting. Now, a system includes a whole lot of different factors and components. Your system will be you, plus the work you do, plus the clients, plus your resources that you have available to you, plus the external environment, which right now is a bit of a, give me a minute, I'll come up with a polite word, gong show. You know, in the sense of all of those things factor in. And so if you think about it, when every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it's getting, then sometimes those results are not what we want. And much as I hate to say it, the best example I can think of right now is long-term care. Long-term care homes in Canada for the past 20 plus years have operated on shoestring budgets, where they've minimal money for everything from food to staffing to repairs to renovations to all of that. And what's the impact of that is now coming out and everybody's screaming, oh, what are we going to do about the situations in long-term care? And having parents in long-term care, I can relate to that. But the reality is, it's not about what a home administrator or anybody is doing. It's about that much larger system that has created the current environment in long-term care. And right now, that system is designed to get the results that it's getting. And that's unfortunately virtually criminal. So when it comes to these kinds of things, this is where short, medium, and long-term comes into play. In the short term, there was a perception they could cut funding to long-term care homes and, you know, everything would still be okay. It is not okay in the medium and the long term. And it's definitely not okay when a crisis hits, because often we can hold things together when everything's okay. We start to lose the ability to control the situation when we find ourselves in any kind of a crisis situation. So in your business, what would happen if you got sick and you could not work for a period of, you know, weeks or months? When we talk about a system, it's important to take a look at this iceberg, because we're looking and we're hearing a lot right now about what's going on in the world. Those are the events. They are the symptoms of everything else that has created the environment where those events can happen. What I want to talk about today is more in line with the patterns that are driving those events, the system dynamics that are driving those patterns, and the other one, we're not going to spend a huge amount of time here because I want to spend more time talking about archetypes and that, but we all have mental models that are driving our system. So if I believe that I can't manage money, guess what? I'm not going to do very well at managing money. If my filters, because mental models are just the filters that we use in which we decide whether something is right, it's wrong, it's fair, it's unfair, it's professional, it's unprofessional, it's appropriate, it's inappropriate, whatever it is that we're using to manage those kinds of dynamics in terms of having it make sense to us they will heavily influence the system. If you want to change a system, you may actually have to change the mental models that you have, in the sense of, if your mental models are not supporting the change in the system, then it's not going to work. And so being aware of your own mental models is one of the key things that you can play with while we're all in lockdown and isolation and staying safe at home. Because it's interesting. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, think about your reaction if you were to go to the grocery store right now with all the physical distancing and the lines of tape on the floor and so on. And as you're standing in the lineup, I come and cut in front of you and move into your space. What would your reaction be? Just unmute yourself real quick and tell me what would be your reaction?
What? WTF?
Just three letters. What did, yeah, okay. Anybody else?
Anxiety.
Anxiety?
Anxiety, fear.
Fear?
Feel threatened. Yeah, fear.
Feeling threatened?
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Aggression. There's even if it's thought.
Mm-hmm. You may react in the sense of saying, because we have been indoctrinated since we were kids, at least where I grew up in Canada, there are rules around lineups. And those rules say that 1, you go to the back of the line, 2, you wait your turn, and 3, you don't cut the line. Those are the first 3 that come to my mind. And that has been specifically reinforced over this whole physical distancing component to things, is that you have to maintain at least that 2-meter distance. And by the way, there's research out now that if you're a jogger, a biker, or a walker outside, those distances have actually been modified by some researchers in Belgium and Denmark, I believe. If you just don't want to be in a direct line behind somebody in front of you, because there's a lot of particulate spray back. That's my public service announcement for today. So, when you think about those kinds of mental models that we have, anytime you find yourself reacting to something, chances are your mental model around that particular situation has just been triggered. And it doesn't hurt to know what they are, because we need to take them out and dust them off every now and then, in terms of whether or not those mental models, oops, I think I just moved that backwards somehow, whether or not those mental models are actually supporting our success or maybe causing us some issues or challenges. Anybody have any questions about any of that up until this point? Okay. So what I wanted to do then is to start to talk a little bit around some of the rules of systems that I came across. And these were created by a team of researchers working with Peter Senge, and they show up in the 5th Discipline and the Dance of Change, and in Chris Argyris's work, Edgar Schein's work, and various other people have used them. The first one is that today's problems come from yesterday's solutions. And this is a major challenge for us right now, because in the effort to go online or fix the problems that we have, we run a significant risk of creating a quick fix solution that may work in the short term, but is going to come back to haunt us in the medium or the long term. So part of the challenge around, and this is one of the most prevalent challenges constantly, I think I say this sentence more often than I say anything else as a consultant, is just be aware that today's problems come from yesterday's solutions. And people's typical response is, yeah, that makes perfect sense. There are a couple of these that I want to focus on. The second one is pretty straightforward. Most of us can think of times when somebody's been pushing us hard and we dug our heels in. So the harder somebody pushes, the more resistance you're going to get. And if you've never experienced that, try putting a snowsuit onto a reluctant 5-year-old.
I think this works in marketing too. Right now, everyone's trying to push and eat everyone else's dinner when it comes to marketing. But marketing right now is not the time to push your programs. Yep. Now is the time to reach out, to help, and to figure out what your clients need, because all the stuff you're pushing right now they may or may not have any use for anymore because everything's changed. Nobody knows what's next. So this is the time for compassion. Yes, Kelly?
No, please continue. I was just going to add to that.
Yeah, because it's a matter of, and now's not the time now's the time to co-create with your clients. How can I help? Blah 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 blah. Okay, you find a pattern, and here's the next thing that you put together and market. Not the same stuff you've always done.
And I think the other thing, Lauren, around that, and I'll come to you in a second, Kelly, okay? The other thing around that is that what you're pushing may actually not be something that the client is interested in at the moment. And so now you move from being seen as a resource and a valuable asset to becoming another email, another message. Kelly.
Exactly. Kelly.
Just in line with all of that, I come from a conflict resolution, conflict prevention, and going back to Maslow's hierarchy needs, doing exactly what you said. People need a sense of security, of being seen, of being heard. Yeah. And for us to do a needs assessment, how can I help? What is your need? Creates that genuine connection and then facilitates, whatever. And I also agree, this is a time to be incredibly creative because needs are very different because we've been upended. And our role is to adjust and accommodate those needs. No.
We may not know what our needs are. Somebody calls me and says, how can I help? I don't know, but give me two options and I might choose one.
So one of the series of questions that we use as mediators all the time is called the cheap BIC questions, or I've heard them referred to all kinds of things. But the very first part of that, the C in that, is what are your concerns? So if you put that out to your clients, what are your major challenges or your major concerns at the moment? You're going to get some pretty valuable feedback around where they're at and what they're dealing with. What do you hope will come out of this? What are your expectations? What are your assumptions? What are your priorities right now? That's the cheap part, and there's a whole lot more of those questions when we work all the way through them. But asking those kinds of questions, as Kelly said, it allows you to get a much clearer picture of where people are at. And part of that is because if we're in business for the long term, then we need to recognize the implications of the decisions that we're making right now. And that's number 3. Behavior grows better before it grows worse. When you put in a short-term, quick fix solution, it may improve the situation, which means that things get better, before that short-term solution starts to fall apart because it's not a solution that is viable in the medium and the long term, and then the problem actually becomes exacerbated even more. And so you may have started out with the problem at this level, you put in a solution which drops the problem down to this level, but then it fails, and the next thing you know, the problem is up here. So behavior does get better before it gets worse. It's short, medium, and long term. And so we need to be thinking all of those. The easy way out usually leads back in. That pretty much speaks for itself. The quick fix, if it had been fast and easy, I say this to people all the time, then you wouldn't have needed to hire me as a mediator, as a consultant, whatever. The cure can be worse than the disease. We need to make, which links back to number 1. Sometimes what we're putting in as a cure, even though it may marginally make things better in the short term, can actually make things worse in the long term. So we need to be aware of that. Number 6 is one of the most critical ones, and it links to number 2. Faster is slower. So coming back to Lauren's comment about people wanting to get online right now, the more I push myself harder to get online right away or to put in whatever solution I think is going to, if I miss the target, then I have to backtrack, redo. I would have actually got there faster if I'd taken my time a little bit more initially and done a wee bit more planning. I'm not talking about analysis paralysis, but I am saying that sometimes too fast isn't particularly helpful. So if I push at something so quickly that I end up making major mistakes that I then have to go back and repair, it can, instead of say 3 weeks, it may take me 2 months. Cause and effect are not closely related in time and space. It's important, and I'm sorry you have to go, Kelly, but if you need to, that's okay. I'm glad you managed to drop in even for a wee bit. Cause and effect are not closely related in time and space. This is the kind of thing that and again, it's short, medium, and long-term thinking. There are times when we make choices, and so the problems that are going to show up may not show up for a matter of days, weeks, or months. And the challenge is that we may not actually relate the problem back to the solution because of that time gap. So if I lean against a post and the post shifts and the roof falls on my head, I know that me leaning against the post caused that roof to fall. Now, if I lean on the post and it sets off a chain reaction in the building and a ceiling tile falls 6 weeks later as a result of that shift and the continual adjustments that the building has made, the chances of me relating that falling ceiling tile that hit me on the head to the fact that I leaned on the post a few weeks ago, pretty slim. And so it's important to recognize that you have to stay connected to what's going on at a subtle level as well as, in the more obvious and visible things. Number 8 is about leverage, and we're going to talk about that more as we get further down in terms of high leverage solutions can make a big difference in a short term. Sometimes they're quick fix solutions. As long as you recognize them for that, you're okay. Number 9, you can have your cake and eat it too, but not all at once. This is related to cause and effect, are not closely related in time and space. But it's also things like we often perceive that if you're doing a quality job, you can't do a fast job. You actually can, but you have to have the systems in place in order to support it. So business systems that will allow, for fast turnaround and still doing a quality job, unless you've made that investment, then you may struggle with that. And my absolutely favorite one of Senge's rules of systems, dividing an elephant in half does not create 2 small elephants. We are notorious as human beings for picking whatever piece of the business we're focused on or whatever problem we're focused on or whatever dynamic we're focused on, and making the assumption or falling into the trap, maybe is a better way to put it, of thinking that that particular issue or problem is either a microcosm of the bigger problem or that it's a self-contained separate piece to the problem and that we can work on it separately. It's not. And so when you work at things from a systems perspective, we need to recognize that every time you make a change in a system, it impacts everything else in the system to some degree. So if I gave every one of you on the call a piece of a jigsaw puzzle and just that, no box picture, could you tell me what the puzzle was going to look like? No, and everybody would think I was crazy if I asked you to, but we do it in business all the time and we do it in problem solving all the time. Systems thinking is not about blame. Blame looks backwards. It's who caused the problem that made this fall apart. And we're incredibly good as human beings at getting the finger pointing out. And if you turn on, if you turned on the news during the political campaign, there was an awful lot of, it's all their fault and, all of that was going on from all sides. I was sorely tempted during the national debate to pose the question. And I actually had a conversation with a CBC reporter after it was over. And when I said, yeah, I was wishing I could have asked this question. And when I told her what the question was, she said, oh, if I'd known you had that one, I would have had you on the call. And my question was, how does your behavior here tonight, in terms of all of the nattering that was going on, demonstrate leadership, professionalism, judgment and integrity and statesmanship? So there is no blame, but there is accountability. So in a system, parts of the system need to be accountable for their contribution to an evolving situation. Finger pointing doesn't work. 1, it's historical, and 2, it assumes that parts of the system are operating independently of other parts. Everything that happens in a system is owned by every part of the system. So if I don't speak up when something is going wrong in my organization, irrespective of my level, if I don't make some or find some way to express my concerns, then I am now part of the problem. And we could get into that on all kinds of levels, but I'm going to leave it at that for the moment. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions on that before we move into the archetypes? Okay. System archetypes are just patterns. They are patterns within a system that have been, they're predictable because research has shown they are prevalent. I think that's probably the best way to put it. So every system is a dynamically complex environment. And Lauren tells me I get too much into my head, but bear with me for a moment because it's important to understand this. Dynamic complexity is what we're all dealing with right now. And it's why we're struggling, or it's one of the reasons at least, why we're struggling so much to know how to navigate this and what changes to put in place. Because if you walked into a dance and you took a snapshot with a camera, would you have a picture of the dance? Yes or no? What do you think? Yes? No? No. Lewis says no.
No.
And I think the challenge, and I saw a lot of no's and thumbs down. You have a picture of a snapshot in time, but that's not dynamic complexity. And dynamic complexity, for me, the dance analogy is one of the best because there's music playing, there are people, some of them are dancing, some of them are not, but everything is continually changing. And every single person out on that dance floor is continually taking in information about where other people are, what they're doing, what kind of music is playing, you know, how good their dance partner is. And if it's me, you probably want CSA approved boots. But that reality that we're taking all that in, we're processing it to make sense of it. And then whatever we choose to do goes back out into that bigger picture for other people to absorb. So every single part of the system on that dance floor, in other words, every person, the DJ, everybody is taking into account what everybody else is doing. And that to me is one of the simplest explanations of what dynamic complexity is. So my decisions in my business have to be taken in the context of that bigger, broader picture. So an archetype is a pattern that tends to show up when we find ourselves in that kind of a system. And there are about 12 archetypes altogether. I'm going to talk to you about 4 or 5 of them, depending on time and how much time we have. I also want you to think about which ones, as we go through them, which ones of Senge's rules of systems apply to you in your situation, and which of these archetypes do you think might be happening in your environment that may or may not be impacting the kinds of things that you have going on. So,
Ruth,
yeah.
Ruth, sorry, I get what dynamically complex is, and I get about the patterns. I'm not sure I'm using the word system the same way you're using it. So could you maybe just give an example of what a system is for the purpose of this discussion?
Let me see if I can just do this really, really, really quickly. I'm just going to zip ahead. I actually sort of anticipated that question might come up. Okay, so take a look at what's on the screen right now. There are things like business systems, which might be where you're going right now in terms of this is the protocol for how we do things, because the word system gets used there a lot, and not everybody's really keen on, you know, business systems, that kind of thing. For me, a system is a combination of all of the bits and pieces. Let's say take your car for the moment, because that was the example. Every single one of these parts up here is part of the system.
Okay.
Now, if you actually want it to be a car and a functioning system, this is not a functioning system. I did actually offer to buy my 16-year-old when she was 16. She's now in her 30s. But when she was 16, I offered her a set of these when she said she wanted a car for Christmas. She wasn't really impressed with the idea because inherently she understood she was not getting something where she could walk out, put a key in the ignition, and drive it out of the driveway. If you want a functioning mode of transportation, then you're, one, going to have to do some assembly, and two, you then become part of the system as well, because it's not a mode of transportation if it's not actually operating. So look at, it's the parts, it's the relationship between the parts, and it's the entire system when it's all operating. Does that make sense?
Yeah, system writ large, as opposed to the steering system.
Well, now you see, here's the other thing. No, you're bang on. That is also a system, because if you look at a car, it has a steering system, it has a fuel system, it has all of those. So those are mini systems that are nested within a larger system. And the human body is the same way. We have a circulatory system, a muscular system, a skeletal system, and so on. None of them function, though, on their own. So if you were to take your digestive system or your circulatory system and, you know, stretch them out on the table, they're not going to eat an apple and deal with it. They're not going to, your heart's not going to pump because it needs all of the other systems. So it's that interconnectedness and dynamic complexity that makes it an actual system. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Just trying to get a sense of where your scale was.
Okay, let me go back up here, and I didn't put numbers on the slide, so it's hard to know which one I'm going to. The big thing about archetypes is that there's a negative version of the archetype and there's a positive version. So I'm going to show you both of them for the ones that I have, but it's also important to recognize that there will be times where you're seeing the negative component, but you may also be seeing the positive component, and it may actually be flipping or it may be spinning. If we had more time, we'd get into that. They interconnect. So if you've got one of them going, take a look, you probably have more than one. And some of them interconnect more naturally than others. But I've picked a couple of the groups that I tend to see most often. The other thing about these kinds of systems is that you want to be aware of this very bottom one, that systems are designed to encounter what they call emergent properties. It's just a surprise. So the system does something unexpected. And it could be a positive surprise, it could be a negative surprise. So here's a list of the kind of the archetypes that have been identified. The ones that are bolded here are the ones that I want to look at. And so, you know, with that in mind, let's actually just start into looking at what it means. So we've talked a little bit about today's problems come from yesterday's solutions. Growth and underinvestment is one of the more primary ones that we see, especially for businesses and business owners. So when we're busy, we don't have time, or we don't make time to invest in, for instance, keeping the sales funnel full, or in developing those kinds of business systems, or writing policies, or, you know, the kinds of things that will build capacity within the organization and make it robust, viable, flexible, and able to adapt. We don't necessarily do that because we're crazy busy, and especially in small systems. There's another one that we're going to look at in a moment called Limits to Success that says I only have so many hours in the day. And so when we're crazy busy, our focus is on, you know, meeting client needs and so on, we tend to slip into growth and underinvestment. So we're, when things slow down then, so you finish that big contract, all of a sudden then, now there's nothing in that sales funnel, or the environmental conditions have changed, which is what we're dealing with right now. And so we now see a problem that we don't have a solution already in place for, and our solution is typically to go at that problem with every piece of energy we have and create what's called the heroic efforts to try and solve that problem. And there's an awful lot of us that are doing this right now around trying to get online. We're working night and day. We're trying to throw programs together. I mean, just as one example. The government is doing this right now in terms of coming up with plans and support programs to support Canadians who are out of work or have no income coming in. Now, those actually, those heroic efforts are typically focused on getting some kind of quick fix, short-term solution in place. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Because the mindset is, I got to fix this right now. But if you look down here at the graph, if this is the normal amount of effort that we would normally put in, when we go to heroic efforts, we're up here. And so we go from, you know, sort of the normal fluctuation in what we're doing, all of a sudden now just that hyper focus on trying to solve the problem. And we try and maintain that. And because of the amount of energy it takes, if you look at the burnout line there, that's where things start to become a problem because it starts to fall apart. Now, the other piece to this is that the problems we're putting in are typically short-term solutions. So if you look at the positive archetype, what it's saying is you need to be working on the business as well as in the business. And that means that you're continually investing in making sure that either the sales funnel is full or you're developing policies and programs and products or whatever it is that you need so that you've got a built-in level of what I would call robust flexibility to handle challenges when they come without having to go into panic mode. And so because you're doing it on a more gradual time frame, it allows you to take the time to get it right or to create a better quality medium and long-term product. And it can eliminate the need for those short-term quick fixes, or it can minimize the need. Now, if you come down here to this graph, if you're coming up here in terms of your effort and you realize that there's a problem and that your investment isn't enough, if you realize it here, then you can actually kick in to start to solve that problem with less energy than if you wait till you're way over here where now the problem is a crisis. Make sense? Okay.
Absolutely, Ruth.
Okay. Limits to success. This was one of the ones where I think I caught Lauren when we were having the conversation, because I believe one of the comments, if I can share, was, I'm going crazy. There aren't enough hours in the day. I've got people emailing me and dinging me because they have time and they all want to make changes right now.
Yeah, everybody wants to be at the front of the line, and everybody, even the existing clients and the new clients, want to have equal time. And there's only, you know, you try and hire someone to help that, but you have to understand when you hire, there's a time investment in training that
Exactly.
you don't have time to train. So it's this huge spinning wheel that, you know, sometimes you have to decide whether saying no or not right now and managing expectations is really what you need to focus on, rather than I need to market, I need to bring people in. It's okay, well, maybe that's not the answer. Maybe the answer is finding out how to handle what you already have.
So I'm going to give the group a challenge. I want you to think about what Lauren just said. And as we go through the next few archetypes, I want you to identify how many archetypes fit into those 6 sentences that she just said. So limits to success. This is when we're trying to solve problems through heroic efforts, or we've had a ton of business come our way and we don't want to say no to it because lots of business is a good thing. The bank account loves it. But the challenge is, especially when we're a small organization or of a few people, or we're an army of one, that we actually can't stretch 24 hours in a day to 36 hours. And so we start to run into constraints in terms of how much energy we have, how many resources we have. And resources are things like time, money, actual resources like equipment and supplies and that kind of thing. You know, I could sew all kinds of handmade masks or homemade masks. I don't necessarily have the materials to be able to do it right now. So anytime we run up against those constraints, then we can run into a situation where all of our efforts are now starting to net less return than they were initially. So it's the law of diminishing returns from economic speak that we need to be aware of. If we plan for those limits and we know what those limits are, so I know I can only sit for X amount of hours in a day, and I've been pushing that one. I know that I only have X amount in the bank and there's nothing else coming in. So am I going to take 75% of my cash flow and invest it in a new website? Maybe not necessarily my best choice at the moment. But taking those short, medium, and long-term constraints into consideration, and also, and we'll talk about this in a couple of minutes, what kind of a payback am I going to get for that investment? So it's finding the strategies to manage all of those limits, and that those limits become a key component to all of the decision making. Does that make sense? Okay, fixes that fail. This has to be one of the most prevalent pieces to decision making that I've come across. Has anybody ever found themselves making a decision to fix a problem using a solution that you've tried in the past? And whether or not that solution was particularly effective, it tends to be our default. And that's fixes that fail. So the problem is that, well, there's a couple of levels to this. The first one is that a quick fix in the short term may actually fix the symptom that we're dealing with, but exacerbate the problem in the medium or long term. That's one type of fixes that fail. The other one that I've seen is, for instance, a company where they need to manage the books. So, you know, there's an election coming up. The government wants to show that they have managed taxpayer dollars effectively, and so they have cut staff. Cutting staff is the quickest way in a business to make the books look better. Now, what's the medium and long-term problem with cutting staff? You may not be able to deliver the programs. You've lost all of the knowledge, experience, and corporate memory that all of those people had. Your pool of resources has now dropped significantly. There's some pretty big challenges that can come, and yet when you look at most organizations, the first thing that we do is we cut staff. So we lay off people, we axe research and development, and we cut training. All of which in the short term save money, in the long term and the medium term tend to cause all kinds of other problems. Now, for individuals, when we're caught up in the heroic efforts, we start to cut things that should be priorities. So I was asked to write an article a number of years ago on what was important for an entrepreneur, and for a mompreneur in particular. So somebody who was parenting as well as running a business. And at that time, I was a chicken and turkey farmer. I was running a mediation business. I was winding up a cleaning business, and I had 4 kids at home. Other than that, things were fairly cool, calm, and collected. And I started to think about what my priorities were, because that was what they asked me to focus on. And I had a big, long list: my kids, my business, you know, all of those things. And then I started to look at what was actually negotiable, in the sense of who else could do some of those things. Well, somebody else could raise my kids. The business, you know, if I wasn't, you know, available to do it, then, you know, it wasn't that big a thing. And when I came down to, when I really started getting brutally honest with myself, there are 4 things that as a human being are completely non-negotiable for me, for you, and for everyone else. No one else can breathe for me, critical in these times. No one else can eat for me. No one else can sleep for me, and no one else can exercise for me. Now, when we get crazy busy, what is the first thing? What are the first things that we tend to let go of? We stop going out to exercise. We stop sleeping as much. So we're staying up later, getting up earlier, cutting the sleep short. And we start going to whatever we can grab in the kitchen, not necessarily eating healthy the way that we should. Hopefully we don't stop breathing. And so fixes that fail, then when you think about it, those are fixes that we may do in order to free up time, in order to work on the problem and you know, put in those heroic efforts. But in the long run, it's one of the worst choices that we could make. Does that make sense? And often what happens is the side effects get ignored. So I'm hungry, I'm tired, I'm falling asleep at my desk, I'm, all of those things. And what do? We try and push through it. But in the short term, it can buy us some time to get a quick fix solution in so that we can then start to look at things. So not all of this is bad. We just need to recognize what's going on. So when we, if we want fixes that work, then we need to look at the side effects and the ripple effects, the medium and the long term. And we want those quick fixes to actually be used to buy us time in order to be able to do a good job of coming up with medium and long-term solutions. And Lauren, this is a place where you may be able to help those clients come up with quick fixes that they can do that get them off your back, but still retain them as clients, and they actually see you as a resource, that kind of thing. By the way, doing referrals is a way of managing those demands and allows us to take the time that we need to get it right. Now, the last one that I want to talk about, at least I think it's the last one, is it's not the last one, it's the second last one, is the attractiveness principle. And for those of us who tend to be the kinds of business owners who want our clients to see us as a resource, we want to be top of mind. We want to be the person that they call. And this is particularly prevalent if you happen to fit in JJ's DISC spectrum in the S category. We don't like to let people down. I think lots of us have, some of that in us. We want to be all things to everybody. So if somebody calls with a problem, we want to be able to help them. Now, the longer I think you've been in business, maybe the better we get at saying, that's actually not my area of expertise. But let me give you a referral to somebody who does do that, where we're still helping them out and we're taking the time to listen and we're doing all of those things. I know other people who would just simply say, that's not something that we do. Good luck in finding someone, and hang up. That's not me. As a mediator, I spend all kinds of time listening to people, talking about conflicts that they've got and so on in, for instance, divorce situations. And I don't ever do divorce mediations anymore. I haven't done them in 20 years. I don't think there's any amount of money on the planet that would convince me to do a divorce mediation, but I will still listen because I don't want to say no, and I don't want to let them down. And so as a result, we can overcommit. We can find ourselves trying to keep all of the balls in the air and beating ourselves up when we aren't able to manage and live up to all of the commitments people want from us and their expectations. And so then we stop sleeping, we stop eating, we start into the heroic efforts to try and juggle it all, and we end up burning ourselves out, which just might fit into some of those other archetype patterns that we were just talking about. Now, there are times where we may actually come out as the superstar who pulls it all together, and people are going, wow, I can't believe you did that. In the short term, that can work. In the medium or long term, being the hero isn't necessarily a sustainable thing, partly because one of the factors of being a hero is that the expectations continually get higher. And the minute you stop meeting that continually raising bar, then all of a sudden you can slip pretty quickly into villain mode because now you haven't lived up to their expectations. So that hero piece is a bit of a slippery slope, and that's another whole conversation that we could have around the drama triangle between victims, villains, and heroes. But ultimately, we don't want to risk our reputation, and so we may take that one on. Be your best is basically, and some of the CAPS folks will recognize this. Pick your lane. Pick your niche, pick your strength, whatever, focus on that, and be more realistic about what you can and can't do, and setting boundaries around boundaries for yourself. I did a session for CAPS Ottawa a few weeks ago. I think it was back in March, wasn't it, Louis? Yeah, it was after I got back from Europe. So yeah, middle of March, I did a session for them on how to create a healthy workplace when you're the only one there.
Before
And
isolation.
that's right. Just before I went into isolation. Yeah. And it has to do with setting some boundaries around what's realistic for you to take on and what isn't, so that you're not burning yourself out and that you're not putting yourself into a situation where you're trying to help someone out and maybe it's not an area that you do particularly well. And it can give you the time then to manage the things that you do want to do more effectively. Okay, last archetype for today. Everyone is dependent on common resources. Right now, the common resource is Zoom. And so I want you to think about this one, because I could have put some really cool video clips and all of that, which would have taken extra bandwidth. But if everybody on Zoom right now did that, what would happen to Zoom? The internet is a common resource. Are there any people here who see themselves as a common resource? Lauren?
Sometimes,
Well,
occasionally.
every client, so
Yep.
think about this one. Everyone feels entitled to the full use of that resource.
Yeah.
And so if you then are the common resource that people have, as far as your clients go,
Yeah.
all of your clients feel they are fully entitled to be at the head of the line. All of our clients, it doesn't matter who we are.
Yeah.
I've had clients who said, well, I know we didn't get back to you to say that we needed you to come on Monday, but now we do, and it's 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon. And it's like, well, I haven't heard from you in a month. That we didn't have a signed contract, so no, I've given that time away. And they're quite, sort of, well, how could you do that? Well, because you're not my only client. And yet there's that thing. In a family, who's the common resource? Mom or dad. In a workplace, who's the common resource? It may be the manager, it could be HR, it could be the union rep, so there's a lot of common resources. And there are times when the common resource is the photocopier. It can be a piece of equipment as much as it can be an individual. But the resource gets depleted because there's no plan in place to manage it. So when I hear people talking about a Zoom call where they open the Zoom room at 8 in the morning and they don't close it until they go to bed at night, and everybody doing that, and it's like, wait a second, we need to move from this over to here where we're actually taking into consideration that we're not the only user. And so educating people about the limits to the system, what happens right now if the internet crashes or Zoom crashes?
Yeah, exactly.
30,000 foot thinking, but we need to think about that. So anybody have any particular archetypes, because we're running into the end of our time. According to my clock, we've got a couple of minutes left.
Yeah, I know Lewis had to go, so thank you very much for coming, Lewis. So yeah, we'll try and wrap this up. I know that we said we would go for one. Are we okay if we go another 5 minutes? I think we're okay.
I'm okay with that. I don't have anything imminently, so I'm happy to stay around for a few minutes and have conversation with anybody who wants to have a discussion. The other thing is, Lauren, you've got a list of everybody. If there's interest in sort of convening a second, okay, now let's talk about what this means, I'm more than happy to do that too.
Okay.
So coming back to the leverage matrix, this is actually the tool that you want to use when you have to make these decisions. So think about how much effort and resources, that includes time, it includes money, it includes all of those things, are you going to have to invest in the solutions that you're thinking about? And actually put this on a big piece of paper up on your wall and get Post-it notes. And then write the solutions to the problems on those Post-it notes. Put one on each Post-it note and then stick them in the appropriate box. And your decisions get made really, really clearly when you start to do this. You can do it online too, or like on the computer if you want. But low, medium, or high amount of effort that goes into it, resources and effort. And then what's the payback going to be? In other words, are you going to get really quick returns and big returns? Think about that. So whichever box you end up in, ultimately, these are your best first steps to use. because what it allows you to do is use or get the biggest results for the least amount of effort on your part. When you get over, so for instance, if I call Lauren and say, I need to redesign my website, did we have that conversation?
Yes, we did.
Big amount of effort. And quite honestly, the payback in the long haul will be good, but in the short haul, no. And so as a result, that would put me into this category. Not something I want to take on in the short term, but in terms of growth and investment, absolutely I need to be working on that. So figure out where you are. You want to be at least in the medium leverage positions and preferably in the high leverage ones.
So Ruth, and I know we're trying to wrap up, but for those of us who really don't know where our problem is going to land, it's one thing to say, you know, print this out and put it up and place your problems where you think they're going to be. But what if you don't really know?
Actually, it's more, try it for solutions instead.
Okay.
Okay, so I need to generate income is the problem that a lot of us are facing. So what if I were to write an article that I could send out to my clients and say, every business is going through this right now in this industry. Here are some ways that we may need to change how we've been doing things. So in other words, the value in doing online training versus face-to-face classroom training. Writing an article about that. How much effort would that take me? Maybe an afternoon, maybe a day, depending on how much I want to put into it. What would the payback be from that article? I would now be more seen as a resource and an ongoing, flexible, adaptable resource by the client group than if I didn't say anything, instead tried to put a training program together without, as Kelly was saying earlier, any kind of a needs assessment. So I invest a huge amount of time and energy over here in terms of effort and resources in putting together a training program, hoping that it's going to be high payback, only to discover that the payback is not there because it's not what the client needs or the client doesn't see the value in it.
And even if we've done a needs assessment in the past 6 months, chances are
it's changed.
all the research that we've done is now no longer valid. We have,
well,
because
some of it may still be valid, but we need to tweak it.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, when I launched a new website like 6 or 7 months ago, and it was all about creating a low cost fix for the new people, but really reaching the seasoned pros and offering a full marketing solution. And well, nobody's going to buy that right now, and it doesn't make sense for me to do that. It also doesn't make sense for me to help a beginner speaker launch their career right now. In fact, I'm turning people away who are saying, I have the money to invest. I'm like, it is going to be a tough road for you. I think the money to invest could be elsewhere.
Right, unless they're looking medium and long term and wanting to get this done while they have time and they have another source of income. They're not relying on this as a quick fix. And in that case, then you may want to keep them as a client because in the long term, it may actually pay off for you in that way. The other thing, and you brought up just when we talk about money, it's not just about us having money coming in, but we also need to recognize that a lot of businesses are really managing their cash flow right now. So big ticket items that we might want to offer aren't necessarily going to be picked up by clients simply because either their workforce is all working from home and they've limited ability to implement whatever they're buying, or they're just holding their cards close to their chest in the sense of we're not going to make any big decisions right now until we see where things go. So from my perspective, I'm looking at it in terms of what are the things that I can do that will keep me top of mind for people, be useful for people, might generate a little bit of income, at least enough to cover non-discretionary spending and hold body and soul together, but I'm not looking at this as a money-making time for me. It's more of a working on the business rather than a working in the business. And, you know, in the short term, I can do that. If we're then looking, you know, months or, you know, months and months down the road, then I may have to reevaluate that. But does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I was just going to say, it's also a matter of you know, I'll later go leverage point.
Okay. So my invitation to you is to give some thought to where are the leverage points for you. And this is like the ongoing conversation that I was talking about. More than happy to have that ongoing conversation with people. You know, send me an email, you know, get in touch. If you go to info@canmediate.com, that gets me anytime, anywhere. And maybe you could just put it in the chat box for me. Sirman@canmediate.com gets me as well. So the last piece that I wanted to think about is time delay. Because as we go to implement those solutions that we've pulled off our leverage matrix to say, these are the ones I'm going to focus on, we need to recognize that every solution we put in is going to experience some level of time delay. Now, if you're familiar with exponential curves, you'll recognize these from some of the coronavirus curves that we're seeing, and part of the problem that we're having in terms of convincing people to maintain the social isolation is that we're in here around the number of cases, and so there are countries around the world and places where they're saying, well, I don't see that big a problem. What they don't realize is that an exponential curve doubles every day. And so when you get over here, you know, if we're at the max on day 30, when are we halfway there? On day 29, not on day 15. And so if we're halfway there here, then we don't have time to implement all the stuff that they're advocating that we do in order to plank or flatten the curve that we keep hearing about, because you have to do that back down here. And so it's a challenge for people. But where it becomes an issue for business owners is that we implement, or we realize there's a problem and we start to come up with solutions, usually somewhere in here where we're either trying to prevent a problem, which is a thing that we can do in here, or we're trying to resolve a problem, which is what we would be wanting to do in here. And so we implement that solution and we give it some time, and we're not seeing any results from it. And because we have a tendency to be somewhat impatient about this, especially for those of us who like to see fast results, what we tend to do is pull the plug on that and go back to the drawing board and start over again. And if I could have figured out a way to put a spinning wheel in here, that's exactly what I would have done. Because what happens is that we try something, and it's often the shotgun or the spaghetti approach, going to throw everything we have at it to see, you know, what sticks. Oh, nothing stuck. Okay, pull the plug, start over. And so we end up cycling through this particular part, and we don't give things time to actually bear the fruit that we know that they can, because we don't want to wait for the for things to actually mature. And this is also where the leverage matrix comes into play. It's why it's such an amazingly powerful tool, because if I put in the things that are going to pay back quickly, then this curve becomes much shorter, and I'm going to see those results a lot faster. And then that will reassure me enough to allow the other longer term solutions to actually to put them in place and to allow them to start to show results. Does that make sense? That cycling is one of the biggest challenges we have. You know, and there's all kinds of memes and poems out there about don't give up and one more blow would have done it, and, you know, all of that kind of thing. But it's true when it comes to things like time delay. And on that note, my daughter gave me a t-shirt, and she was about 10 or 11, I think, that said, if you think you're too small to be effective, you've never been to bed with a mosquito. And it occurred to me that for many of us, we're overwhelmed because how are we ever going to manage to survive this as an independent business, as a small business owner, and so on. And part of the challenge is that oftentimes we've got those nattering little voices, you know, ringing in our ears. And for any of us who know what those gremlins sound like, we're often, you know, part of our problem is that we're discounting what we can do. And so what occurred to me was that when I think I can't make a difference or that what I do doesn't matter, think about one small virus that has brought the whole world to a virtual standstill. And so on that note, what I would say is believe in yourself, take a deep breath, which is also a good thing with a respiratory situation going on. Think, plan, and do it in the short term, the medium term, and the long term, so that you actually have the viability to survive and get through this, because the world needs us as small businesses. If you were to look at the percentage of businesses in Canada that qualify as small businesses, we are huge. And so if we all close down, if things happen that we are not viable when all of this is over, that will be a huge travesty for the country and for the world. So take a deep breath, figure out, make it work. Any last thoughts, comments before we let everybody go?
Eric?
I wanted to say I'm blown away by the depth of your experience and knowledge, and I want to thank you for the last hour or so. Very valuable stuff.
You're welcome, Eric. Every now and then, it's funny, for a lot of the groups that I belong to, I've never been able to quite figure out how to take what I do professionally and use it in that context. And Lauren's helped me see that maybe there are ways that that it can be valuable in the you know, in the worlds that I don't normally deal with, like very small businesses and armies of one.
No, this is fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you, Eric. So thank you everybody for taking part and for being a part of everything. And just final thoughts. As Ruth said, believe in yourself, breathe, think, plan, and do. And I think one of the things that is going to come out of this entire pandemic situation is it's going to force innovation and creativity in a way that we have never seen before, or at least never in my lifetime. And I'm, as awful as it might feel sometimes, this is an opportunity for us to completely look at our lives, our businesses, our services, and everything with fresh new eyes, and come up with things that will take us even further than we were before. So thank you again for coming, and I wish you good health and safety and business success in the long term. Thanks, everybody.
I would echo that, and thank you so much for your time and attention.
Absolutely.
All right. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.